The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that particular shade of institutional white that made everything look slightly sick. Rachel Torres stood in the security line at San Diego International, her conference badge clipped to the collar of her blue cardigan, her carry-on positioned at the exact angle that would draw no attention. 8 years of invisible. 8 years of being the person people looked through rather than at. Her hands, scarred from work that official record said never happened, gripped the handle of her rolling luggage with the kind of steady pressure that came from muscle memory built in places the maps left blank. She was early. Always early. The 6:56 a.m. TSA checkpoint had the particular rhythm of a shift change, agents rotating out, new ones settling in, that 3-minute window where supervision was thin and patience thinner. She'd learned to move in those windows. Not hiding, exactly. Just present in a way that didn't register. The man ahead of her was elderly, maybe 72, with the kind of posture that came from military bearing even when bones had started their slow refusal. His hands moved, deliberate, practiced gestures that most people wouldn't recognize. Sign language. American Sign Language. The kind Rachel's mother had taught her in the kitchen of a house that no longer officially existed. The kind that had become its own language in her body, separate from the life she was building here in fluorescent-lit corridors and clinical break rooms. The TSA agent waved him through the metal detector. The gate beeped. Red light. Anomaly. Derek Caldwell emerged from the supervisor's station like a man who'd been waiting for an excuse to materialize. He wore the kind of authority that came from a position just large enough to matter and a personality just small enough that he needed it to feel significant. Security manager. The badge said it, but his shoulders said it louder. He was 48, maybe 50, with the weathered tan of someone who spent breaks outside and the expression of someone who'd never been told no in any way that stuck. "Sir, step back through," Caldwell said, his voice the particular volume of someone speaking to someone he'd decided was stupid. "Let's try that again." The elderly man's hands moved again, slower this time, as if volume in Caldwell's tone had somehow translated to needing clearer gestures. His hand shaped the explanation, cochlear implant. Metal. Triggered sensor. Rachel watched Caldwell's face. Watched the moment calculation happened behind his eyes. Watched him make the decision. He lifted his hands. Exaggerated the sign language gestures in mockery so broad that the two TSA agents beside him, Torres and Martinez, according to their badges, immediately started to smile. Caldwell's fingers splayed in distorted mimicry, his expression arranged into something between confusion and contempt. He looked like a man imitating a child imitating an alien. "If you can't follow simple instructions, maybe you shouldn't be traveling alone," Caldwell announced. His voice carried, it was meant to carry. 18 people in the security queue heard it. 12 of them turned to look. 8 of them smiled at the joke being offered to them, this man's humiliation as morning entertainment. The elderly man's hands trembled. Not from fear. From the particular kind of rage that comes from being unseen, unheard, turned into a spectacle. His mouth moved, Rachel caught the shape, "I served." Caldwell didn't catch it. He was already turning away, already radiating the satisfaction of a man who'd won a confrontation he'd engineered. One of the TSA agents laughed, a quick, sharp sound like a gate slamming. Rachel's feet moved before her brain finished registering the decision. She stepped forward. No hesitation. No performance of uncertainty. She positioned herself between Caldwell's retreating frame and the elderly man's trembling hands, and she signed. Fluid. Perfect. The hands of someone who'd learned in living rooms and spoken it in silence for 20 years. Her fingers asked the question the man was trying to answer, the implant triggered the gate. His hands answered back. Rapid now. Relief flooding through every gesture. Yes. New implant. 3 months old. The magnet underneath the skin. Always sets off detectors. He'd explained this. At the gate. To the first agent. Rachel turned to face Caldwell. Turned slowly, the way someone turns when they've made a decision that can't be unmade. Her eyes met his for exactly one breath before she looked away, and not in submission, but in dismissal, the way you might look at something that wasn't worth the full weight of your attention. His cochlear implant triggered the detector, Rachel said. Her voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that made people lean in. It's metal. He explained this. He served. Caldwell's face underwent a transformation. The satisfaction drained. In its place came something harder, something that recognized a challenge to the architecture he'd just built. He took a step toward her, and the airport's particular geography seemed to shift. The other travelers' phones came out. A woman in a red blazer was already filming. "You're interfering with federal security procedures," Caldwell said. His voice had changed, dropped into something official, something that tried to carry the weight of institutions behind it. "I'm going to need to see your identification." Rachel reached for her wallet. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of movement that didn't provoke anything. Her driver's license appeared, Rachel Maria Torres, civilian, San Diego address, no flags. Clean. Built carefully. Caldwell examined it like it was evidence. Like it was proof of something. "You work here?" he asked, though his expression suggested he'd already decided the answer to his own satisfaction. "Nursing," Rachel said. She kept her voice level. 6 words. Not more. Not less. VA clinic. 3 blocks from here. Caldwell handed back her license. But his eyes had stopped calculating and started planning. She could see it happen, the moment a man accustomed to unquestioned authority decided he'd been questioned. The moment he started working backward through the incident, reframing it. Not as a security gap exposed, but as a challenge to his control that needed correcting. He walked to the intercom system built into the security checkpoint wall. His hand moved across the panel with the familiarity of someone who knew exactly which buttons meant what. A crackle of feedback. Dead air. Every head in the terminal turned toward the sound. "Attention passengers and airport personnel," Caldwell's voice came through the speakers, amplified, official, transformed into something that sounded like institution. "This is Derek Caldwell, Airport Security Manager. We have an example of civilian interference in federal security procedures occurring at Checkpoint 7. This is precisely the kind of behavior that compromises everyone's safety. Our protocols exist for a reason. Cooperation with TSA personnel is not optional. I want everyone to understand that." The PA system crackled off. Rachel stood very still. 18 people were staring at her now. The elderly man, Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez, though she didn't know that yet, was staring at her with an expression that moved from relief to something more complicated. Gratitude mixed with the weight of knowing he'd just watched someone take fire meant for him. Caldwell met her eyes across the checkpoint, and Rachel saw something in his expression that was both dangerous and predictable, a man who'd been questioned in public, and who'd just decided that the questioning needed to be answered. But that wasn't the worst part. Caldwell's face had gone the color of bad antiseptic. He stood motionless for exactly 3 seconds, then pivoted toward the security office with the kind of stride that meant decisions had already been made. His radio crackled. 2 words, detain her. A TSA officer materialized at Rachel's elbow, mid-20s, the kind of uniform that still held its creases. She didn't resist. Resistance meant paperwork, meant questions about why she was fighting, meant attention she couldn't afford. She simply turned and walked. The officer's hand hovered near her arm but didn't touch. He didn't need to. Authority was all it took. The corridor behind security smelled like stale coffee and floor stripper. Rachel's carry-on remained at the checkpoint, confiscated 20 seconds after Caldwell declared it suspicious. She hadn't watched him do it. She'd already learned decades ago that witnessing your own erasure twice was redundant. The security office was white walls, a metal desk, a chair bolted to the floor. Standard furniture designed to make you feel temporary. Caldwell entered 3 minutes later, his phone already pressed to his ear. The voice through the speaker belonged to someone named Patricia. Rachel caught the name before she tuned it out. Not her business. Never her business. Yes, this is Derek Caldwell, Security Director at San Diego International. I'm calling regarding Rachel Torres, one of your contract nurses at the VA clinic. His tone was professional, regretful, the voice of a man reporting a problem he'd tried to solve kindly. We've just had an incident here that I think you need to be aware of. Aggressive behavior. Verbal confrontation with federal personnel. She interfered with a TSA screening operation and became, well, unstable when asked to comply. Rachel sat in the bolted chair. She did not cross her arms. She did not look away. She did not move. I'm documenting everything, Caldwell continued. I'll need her employment file flagged for review. This kind of instability around vulnerable travelers, we can't be too careful, can we? A pause. She could hear Patricia's voice on the other end, tinny and concerned. I appreciate that. Yes. I'll file a formal incident report with the TSA within the hour. Thank you for taking this seriously. He hung up. Looked at Rachel like she was a problem he'd already solved and was now just watching it decompose. Your supervisor seems to think you might have had a stressful week. He sat down across from her, his posture relaxed, almost kind. This was stage 2, the performance of reasonableness. I told her that you became emotional when corrected. That you challenged my authority in front of hundreds of people. That you claimed to know sign language and used it to interfere with federal security procedures. Rachel met his eyes. One measured breath. Held it. Released it slowly. That's not what happened, she said. No. He leaned back. Because I have witnesses who saw you initiate contact with a traveler who was already being handled. I have TSA agents who heard you question my judgment. I have security footage that shows you deliberately inserting yourself into an operation. He smiled. The kind that arrives before the knife. And I have a report I'm filing that documents an unstable contract employee who became aggressive when asked to follow airport security protocols. Would you like to know what that pattern looks like? She said nothing. It looks like someone who shouldn't be working in any medical facility. He stood. Your carry-on is going to be searched. Standard procedure for any detention. If we find anything, and I mean anything, we'll be handing you over to San Diego police. If we don't find anything, you'll be banned from this airport indefinitely. Either way, I'll be recommending to the TSA that you be placed on a security watch list. That recommendation will be forwarded to every healthcare facility in California. He moved toward the door. Paused. You know what I still don't understand? His voice had shifted, lighter now, genuinely curious. Why a contract nurse would throw her career away for someone who'll never remember her name. That's not compassion. That's Messiah complex. And that's exactly what my report will say. The door clicked shut. Rachel was alone in white walls and fluorescent hum, her breathing the only sound. Outside, somewhere in the main terminal, Staff Sergeant Dominguez was still standing at the checkpoint. Probably confused. Probably wondering if he'd imagined the moment when someone signed his name back to him like it mattered. Like he mattered. 23 minutes later, Caldwell returned with 2 officers. One carried her carry-on. The bag had been unsealed, its contents rearranged, nothing missing, everything slightly wrong. Books stacked differently. Her jacket folded instead of rolled. The kind of violation that didn't break laws, just certainties. Nothing, the officer said to Caldwell. Disappointed, maybe. Then we proceed with the airport ban. He turned to Rachel. You're being detained for an additional 2 hours while we complete documentation. After that, you're released but barred from terminal access. Try to enter this airport again and we'll press charges. Rachel was moving before she decided to move. Pure instinct. Stage 3 of anything was violence, and violence was the one thing she'd spent 8 years learning to recognize before it arrived. She stood. Slowly. Her chair scraped across tile. The sound of something leaving behind evidence. His name is Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez. Her voice had changed. Dropped. The kind of quiet that makes officers unconsciously step back. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan. While he was there, he held the line for soldiers who couldn't. While he was there, he lost the hearing in his left ear to an IED blast at Sanjin. While he was there, he earned a Purple Heart that's sitting in a frame at home next to his daughter's Navy commission. Caldwell's face had gone very still. He served so that you could have this job. So you could make decisions about security. So you could run this checkpoint with authority. And the first thing you did when you got that authority was mock him because he couldn't hear your instructions. She took 1 step. The officers tensed. He came here to travel home to see his grandchild. And you made him feel like his disability was a threat. 1 tear came down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She let it fall and kept her eyes locked on his. That's what happened here. Caldwell opened his mouth. Closed it. His jaw was working like he was chewing something bitter. The 2 officers exchanged glances, the kind that meant they'd both just watched the script flip upside down, and none of them knew what the new ending was supposed to be. Take her to holding, he said finally. His voice had lost its warmth. 2 hours. Document everything. The holding area was a different room, also white, also fluorescent, but this one had reinforced glass and a bench bolted to the wall. No window. No clock. The kind of space designed to stretch time until it became a substance you were drowning in. Rachel sat on the bench and did not think about anything. Thinking led to strategies. Strategies led to hope. Hope led to the moment when hope ended, and there was nothing between you and the fall. At 6:16 a.m., the door opened and an officer escorted her to the airport entrance. Her carry-on was returned. The sky was the color of wet concrete. San Diego would be waking up soon. People would be checking their phones, reading emails about fires and politics and the ordinary catastrophes of living. None of them would know that a man had stood at a security checkpoint yesterday and felt the weight of being invisible. None of them would know that a woman had spent 8 years becoming invisible so nobody would have to see who she was. None of them would know that both those things had just collided. Caldwell stood by the exit, watching her leave. Their eyes met for exactly 1 moment. In that moment, Rachel understood something she'd been trained to recognize in 3 languages and 4 military contexts: the moment a man realizes he's made a decision that can't be unmade. The moment he understands there are consequences. But she didn't know what those consequences would cost. Not yet. Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez stood at gate 47, boarding pass trembling in his weathered hand. The airport terminal around him felt endless, fluorescent lights casting everything in that sterile white glow, travelers rushing past like a river around stone. He had survived 3 tours of Helmand Province. He could survive a flight to Seattle. Then his chest seized. The pain came like lightning, a fist closing around his sternum. His knees buckled. The boarding pass scattered across the tile floor as he dropped, his body crashing against the hard edge of a metal bench. Around him, travelers scattered backward in that primal way humans move when death enters a room. A woman screamed. Someone shouted for security. An elderly man loosened Dominguez's collar while strangers formed a protective circle of uselessness, phones rising to record the moment instead of help it. Derek Caldwell's voice crackled through his radio. He was already moving toward the commotion, his uniform crisp, his authority absolute in the way men like him understood authority, as something to be announced rather than earned. Security to gate 47. Medical emergency. Clear the area. Move, people. Now. He arrived to find the veteran on his back, jaw clenched, breathing in short gasps that sounded like a man drowning on dry land. Ambulance ETA for minutes, someone said into a radio. For minutes. The numbers landed like stones. Caldwell barked orders, creating the illusion of control: push the crowd back, secure the perimeter, nobody touch him, wait for medical. Protocol. Procedure. The things that made men like him feel essential. He was already composing the report in his mind. If another incident managed, another situation contained, another reminder that without him this place would collapse into chaos. In the detention office 30 meters away, Rachel Torres sat alone in a chair that smelled of industrial cleaner and someone else's sweat. Her carry-on bag sat on a metal table, its contents still scattered from Caldwell's search, her conference materials, her change of clothes, the faded unit patch sewn into the lining of her jacket that no one had thought to look for because they were looking for the wrong things in the wrong places. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head. Overhead, she heard the announcement, "Medical emergency, Gate 47. All personnel stand by." She stood. The detention room door was locked, but the lock was designed to keep people in during questioning, not during crisis. Rachel turned the handle with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from understanding which rules exist for safety and which exist for appearance. The door opened. No alarm sounded. Caldwell had been too focused on his interrogation to consider that she might move toward danger instead of away from it. The gate area was chaos held barely in check, travelers crowded behind barriers, voices layering over each other, that specific airport electricity that comes when normalcy ruptures. Rachel saw Dominguez first. His body lay motionless on the tile, his face the color of wet concrete. A businessman knelt uselessly beside him, hands hovering, unsure what to do with the weight of another man's death arriving in real time. Rachel moved through the crowd like water finding the lowest point. She didn't run. She didn't call out. She simply appeared on her knees beside Dominguez, muscle memory recognizing what medical school only taught, that a man's survival was being measured in seconds, that his heart was failing its fundamental contract with his body, that the space between alive and dead was smaller than most people understood. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Nothing. Carotid pulse absent. She tilted his head back, opened his airway with the kind of mechanical precision that bodies develop when trained repeatedly on how to save lives. Her hand moved to his chest, finding the xiphoid process, measuring up 2 fingers width, locating the sternum center the way 1,000 hours of training had taught her to locate it without thinking. Call 911. Tell them a male, 72, cardiac event at Gate 47 San Diego International. We have no AED, no oxygen, no for access. Ground transport ETA is 4 minutes, she said, her voice the temperature of steel cooling. No one asked her who she was. When someone speaks with that kind of authority, people obey first and question later. She positioned her hands. Right palm on the sternum, left hand locked over it, shoulders directly above, arms straight. The first compression felt like pushing through concrete. The second felt like memory. By the 10th compression, there was no thought left, only the repetitive mechanical necessity of forcing a failing heart to remember how to beat. Compression. Release. Compression. Release. The rhythm of survival. 30 compressions, 2 rescue breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The protocol that had been beaten into her muscle memory during combat medic certification, refined during the firefight in Marja where she performed field thoracotomy on a Marine with a sucking chest wound, using nothing but a combat knife and the knowledge that sometimes you have to cut a man open to save his life. Dominguez's ribs bent under her hands. She didn't slow. Broken ribs were the acceptable price of resuscitation, alive with injuries or dead with dignity, and she had long ago made peace with choosing the former. Come on, she whispered, not to him but to his heart. Come on. Come on. The businessman who had been kneeling beside Dominguez backed away. Travelers stared. Someone was filming on a phone. Rachel didn't register any of it. She existed only in the space between compressions, counting silently, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, her hands becoming the only rhythm that mattered in the world. Then Caldwell was there, his voice cutting through everything like a knife through water. Step back from the patient. This is airport security, and you're contaminating the scene. Step back now. Rachel didn't look up. Compression 31. 32. 33. I said step back. Officers, remove this woman from the patient. Now. That's an order. 2 airport police officers moved toward her. Rachel maintained compression 35, 36, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. She tilted Dominguez's head back again, sealed her mouth over his, breathed air into his lungs with the precision of someone who understood that oxygen was life, that every second without perfusion meant neurons dying, that this man's mind, the one that had learned Arabic, that had survived 3 tours, that had earned the right to board an airplane without being mocked, was being measured in the space between her breaths. 30 compressions, she said, not a request but a command. The officer needs to call for oxygen, 2 liters nasal cannula, and notify medical staff we need a defibrillator. Caldwell stepped forward. You do not have authority here. You do not have medical credentials in this facility. Officers, remove her. The police officers hesitated. They had seen enough triage scenarios to understand that the woman performing CPR knew what she was doing. But Caldwell's authority was institutional, was present, was wielding itself like a hammer. Rachel didn't wait. Compression 37, 38, 39. The rhythm unbroken. Dominguez's body responding to the mathematics of physics, force applied, pressure transmitted, cells kept alive by the mechanical insistence of her hands. 2 minutes, someone called out. 2 minutes until the paramedics arrived. 2 minutes during which Dominguez's brain was dependent on the blood she was forcing through his vessels. 2 minutes during which every compression was the difference between recovery and permanent neurological damage. I'm not asking, Caldwell said into his radio. I'm ordering you. Remove her from the patient now. Now. Rachel felt hands on her shoulders. The police officers, acting under orders, attempting to extract her from the resuscitation. She didn't resist, she simply continued compressions while being pulled backward, her hand still on Dominguez's chest, her rhythm unbroken, her voice steady as stone. His O2 sat was probably 70 before collapse. Compressions need to continue or he goes into permanent deficit. You pull me away, you're pulling away his blood supply. I don't care what you think Caldwell started. 75% oxygen saturation would cause cognitive decline. 68% causes loss of consciousness. You're looking at 40 seconds until permanent brain damage. You want that on your record. The numbers hung in the air. Rachel let go of the compressions only when she had to, and they were completed immediately, the second officer taking over, his hands following her rhythm, compression, 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 the chain unbroken. Medical staff is barred from entering this gate area until the patient is secured, Caldwell announced. No oxygen. No defibrillator. Patient remains under security hold until. You're letting him die, Rachel said. Not angry. Not pleading. Just stating the observable truth the way one states that water is wet. 80 seconds without oxygenation. Heart rate dropping. When he arrests a second time, and he will, there won't be enough blood flow to his brain to recover. That's your choice to make. But make it consciously. The officer doing compressions looked at Caldwell. Back at Rachel. His hands continued the rhythm. 85 seconds. 90. 95. The room was silent except for the sound of compression against bone, the squeak of shoes on tile, the distant wail of an ambulance growing closer. 100 seconds. 105. 110 seconds of measured, mechanical, perfect resuscitation. Rachel knelt beside them, watching Dominguez's chest rise and fall with each forced breath, watching his face for the smallest sign of returning color, watching the numbers climb in her mind like a ticking clock that only she could hear. 115. Paramedics, someone said. The ambulance doors burst open, the paramedics moving with the efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. They arrived with equipment, with oxygen, with the weight of institutional medical authority that Caldwell could not question. Rachel stepped back. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the release of adrenaline and the knowledge that she had just performed an emergency resuscitation in front of hundreds of witnesses while being actively prevented from doing so by the man whose job it was to ensure safety. The paramedics loaded Dominguez onto a stretcher. Their leader looked at the officer still performing compressions. "Good work. Keep the rhythm. We're going to take over." Rachel moved toward the ambulance bay, but Caldwell's hand caught her arm. "You're coming with me," he said. "Security office. Now." And that was when Rachel understood that some men would rather be right than save a life. That some men understood authority only as dominion over others. That some men would spend the rest of their careers explaining why they prevented a woman from resuscitating a patient, and they would die still believing they had been correct. She went with him, her jacket still holding its secrets, her credentials still hidden, her hand still knowing exactly what they had just done. But that wasn't the worst part. The paramedics arrived in a controlled storm of motion. One pushed a stretcher. Another carried an oxygen kit. The third moved straight to Dominguez with the precision of someone who'd done this 400 times before. They didn't see her. They saw an elderly man on the tile floor and they responded. Rachel stepped back without being told. Caldwell's hand gripped her upper arm, pulling her away from the patient. His fingers dug in hard. She didn't resist. The paramedics had what they needed now. Her hands were no longer the ones that mattered. "O2 SAT is 78, one of them called out. "Getting a line," another said. Dominguez's eyes found hers as they lifted him onto the stretcher. He reached out. His fingers trembled. She saw the gratitude in them, the recognition. She turned away before he could speak. 2 airport police officers approached from her left. Not rushing. Not angry. Just moving with the absolute certainty of institutional authority. Caldwell released her arm and nodded to them like he was handing off a piece of luggage. "She's to be escorted from the terminal," Caldwell said. "Federal security concern." The officers didn't ask questions. They flanked her. She didn't feel fear. She felt something much colder than that. She felt the weight of every 8 years pressing down at once, all of it collapsing in real time, visible to the 300 people standing motionless in the terminal, watching a woman in scrubs being walked away from a dying man she'd just saved. One of the officers placed his palm against the small of her back. Gentle but immovable. Like a door closing. They moved through the terminal toward the security office while the paramedics wheeled Dominguez toward the exit. The rotor wash of the helicopter waiting on the tarmac shook the windows. The security office was smaller than she expected. Gray walls. Metal desk. 2 chairs. Caldwell entered behind them and closed the door with a soft click. He walked to the desk and stood behind it like a general addressing the condemned. "You're banned from San Diego International," he said. "Effective immediately. That means terminals, parking, shops, rental car facilities, all of it. You step foot on airport property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing." Rachel didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't give him the reaction he was hunting for. "I'm also filing a report," he continued, "with the California Board of Registered Nursing. This was interference with federal security procedures during an active medical emergency. Assault on a federal officer. Breach of containment protocols." He smiled. The smile was the worst part. The smile meant he believed every word. "That license of yours will be flagged for review within 48 hours. By the time this gets to a hearing, every medical board in California will have your file. You won't work in this state again." He said it like he was reading a sentence. Like the outcome was already carved into stone. The silence in the room felt like pressure. Like the air itself was pushing down. Rachel took one measured breath. She met his eyes. And then she said, his name was Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez. He served 3 tours in Kandahar. He came here to visit his daughter. Today he learned what his country thinks of him. Caldwell's face didn't change. But something in his shoulders tightened. "Get her belongings from the holding area," he said to the officers. "Take her to the north exit. She's to leave the airport property." They handed her the cardboard box with her jacket and the 2 books she'd been carrying. Her phone. Her wallet. The small things that added up to a civilian life. She took the box without looking at it. Without looking at Caldwell. She just carried it out into the corridor as the officers walked beside her like an honor guard for something that was already dead. The north exit opened onto the parking garage. Late afternoon light slanted through the concrete structure. Everything smelled like exhaust and hot asphalt and the metallic tang of oil that had been leaking from cars for 20 years. The officers didn't follow her into the garage. Caldwell's punishment only extended to the airport itself. She walked to her car. A 2009 Honda Civic. Gray. Invisible. Perfect for 8 years of not existing. She sat in the driver's seat with the box on her lap. She didn't turn the key. She just sat there with her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, breathing slow and shallow, feeling 8 years of compartmentalization collapse like a building with the supports removed all at once. The rain started around 5 o'clock. It came down in sheets, hammering the windshield, drumming on the roof of the parking garage like applause for a show that nobody wanted to watch. She could see her hands shaking in the dim light. Not from fear. From restraint. From the effort of not moving, not screaming, not driving back into that terminal and doing something that would end very differently than this. In the back seat, her jacket lay draped across the seat. The unit patch was sewn into the lining. Faded green thread on faded olive drab. A unit designation from a place the government had officially decided she'd never been to. A unit patch from an extraction that was classified so deep that even now, 8 years later, sitting in this parking garage with rain destroying the world outside, she wasn't allowed to speak about what had happened in that compound in Marja. Who she'd lost. What she'd done to get out alive. She'd been told never to surface. Never to acknowledge. Never to let anyone know. The military had erased her from all the records. Her official service record said she'd been discharged in 2016 with an honorable discharge and no further details. No deployments listed. No special forces attachment. No medical certification from a combat environment. Just a name and a date and a file folder that contained nothing real. 8 years of being invisible. 8 years of working contract shifts as a temporary nurse. 8 years of giving everything she had to people she'd never see again, because that was the only way to keep the work alive. The only way to honor what she'd learned in Marja when she'd held a man named Santos while he died from a wound she couldn't close. When she performed a field thoracotomy with a combat knife because the surgical bay was 3 kilometers away and he couldn't wait that long. When she'd realized that the real work wasn't in hospitals with proper equipment. It was in the dark places where people bled out without witnesses. She'd come back and tried to exist as a normal person. She'd taken a job as a contract nurse at Oak Creek Memorial because it was small enough that nobody would ask questions. Because you could disappear in the margins of institutions that were too busy to notice you. She'd kept her head down. She'd done her work. She'd been exactly what she was supposed to be, unforgettable. And then Caldwell had dragged her into the light in front of 300 people. He'd exposed her. Not her true identity, not yet, but the existence of her. The fact that she was capable of more than she appeared. That she had knowledge and skill that didn't fit the narrative of a contract nurse. That she could perform emergency medicine under pressure with a precision that wasn't natural. That came from somewhere else. Her phone was still in the box. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. No messages. No calls. Her clinic supervisor had probably received Caldwell's report by now. There would be an investigation. There would be questions. There would be a file opened. The beginning of the end of whatever this 8 years had been. She looked at the unit patch through the back seat. She'd bought it on a website that sold military memorabilia. The real one was locked in a safety deposit box under a name that didn't officially exist. This one was just a reproduction. But she'd sewn it into her jacket anyway, the way her squad leader had shown her 20 years ago, the way soldiers kept pieces of themselves when the records were erased. For a moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, she thought about throwing the patch away. Starting over. Finding a small town where nobody asked questions. Becoming someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who didn't remember Marja. Someone who didn't know how to save lives in the dark places. The rain hammered down. She held the patch in her hands and the fabric was soft and worn and real in a way that nothing else in her life was anymore. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. The rain was loud enough that she could hear nothing but the percussion of water on metal and glass and concrete. And then, underneath the rain, she heard something else. A distant sound. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Growing louder. The sound of a helicopter's rotors, cutting through the evening like a knife through fabric. Getting closer. The helicopter's rotors cut through the evening like teeth through silk. Rachel heard them before she saw the red lights strobing across the rain-soaked parking garage. Her forehead pressed against the steering wheel. Engine dead. Heart still. The landing pad was on the hospital roof, 3 blocks away. She knew that sound. UH-60M Black Hawk. Night Stalker configuration. The kind of aircraft that didn't appear in civilian airspace without a reason that started in classified briefings. Her phone had been buzzing for 18 minutes. She hadn't answered. By morning, routine airport security protocols had flagged her detention. Federal databases lit up like a grid of warnings. Her classified security clearance, buried under 7 layers of redacted paperwork, pinged 3 government agencies simultaneously. Someone in Arlington, Virginia saw her name surface. Someone else in a building without a name on any map started making phone calls. The airport manager's office occupied the northeast corner of Terminal 2. Derek Caldwell stood at the head of a polished conference table, flanked by 2 TSA supervisors and a legal representative from the airport authority. Formal termination papers were being prepared. Rachel Torres would be banned from all civilian airport operations indefinitely. Her nursing license would be flagged in California and flagged again in every state that recognized reciprocity. Then Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez's daughter walked through the door. Navy Lieutenant Sarah Dominguez wore her dress blues without a wrinkle. 28 years old. Command presence like a knife through water. She stopped at the threshold and let the room absorb her presence before she spoke. You detained Major Torres. Not a question. A statement. The words landed like rounds from a rifle. Caldwell's face went pale. I'm sorry, who are you? This is a private meeting. Major Rachel Torres. 8 deployments. 3 with Special Forces attachment. My father's commanding officer during the Marja operation. She placed a small photograph on the table. Rachel in full combat gear, 2009, carrying a wounded soldier across her shoulders while rounds kicked up dust around her boots. You restrained an active duty officer in a federal security facility. On what authority? The VA nurse who had retrieved Rachel's abandoned belongings stepped forward with a personnel file. Her hands were shaking. She opened to the service record and read from pages stamped sealed, eyes only. Field promotion to Major. 8 years active. 3 years classified attachment to Joint Special Operations Command. Marja Valley, Helmand Province. Citation for Valor under fire. Performed emergency field thoracotomy with available implements while sustaining direct enemy contact. 17 lives, documented rescue operations. 16 lives, field stabilization with minimal equipment. 1 life, she paused, voice cracking. 1 life saved during a Black Ops extraction. Classified. A SEAL team leader walked into the office. He had been traveling through the airport when the detention orders went out. Master Chief James Graves. 32-year service record. Silver hair. Eyes that had seen things that didn't have names. He looked directly at Derek Caldwell. Major Torres holds the Silver Star for actions that saved 17 lives under sustained enemy fire. 2 Bronze Stars for battlefield medicine. A Purple Heart from shrapnel wound sustained while stabilizing a casualty. Another Purple Heart from an IED strike during the extraction you just heard about. Each medal landed like a hammer blow. Caldwell's breathing had become audible. She outranks everyone in this building. Everyone in this airport. Everyone you've ever met. 2 FBI agents arrived at 9:24 a.m. Boots on tile. Badges flashing. One of them placed a document on the table. It was signed by a deputy director at the bureau. Major Torres was placed in witness protection status following classified testimony regarding documented war crimes. Her military record is sealed by federal order. Her identity is protected status. Your public exposure of her, over the airport PA system, in front of witnesses, documented on airport recordings, constitutes a federal security breach. The second agent stepped closer to Caldwell. You've disclosed the identity of a protected witness. You've endangered an active classified asset. You've exposed someone who spent 8 years following direct orders to remain invisible. Federal charges. Violation of the Witness Protection Act. You have the right to remain silent. Caldwell's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. He looked around the room, at the Navy officer, the SEAL commander, the federal agents, the trembling VA nurse still holding his sealed record. Reality was collapsing around him like a building with its support structures removed. I was following protocol. She interfered with security procedures. I have the authority. You have nothing, Graves said. His voice was soft. That made it worse. You abused authority to humiliate a soldier. That soldier saved your life by saving your commanding officer's life. And you tried to destroy her for it. That evening, Derek Caldwell attempted damage control. Local news. Live broadcast. He sat in a studio under professional lighting and explained his actions as proper airport security protocol. Routine procedures. Officer safety. De-escalation techniques. A retired Special Forces colonel called in during the live segment. His name was Marcus Clayton. 40-year career. Joint Task Force commander. His voice was calm. Methodical. He spent 8 minutes describing Caldwell's harassment in detail. He named specific times. Specific insults. Specific moments where Caldwell had deliberately humiliated a deaf veteran for sport. Then he described Major Rachel Torres. She is a decorated combat officer. She has battlefield medical training that exceeds most trauma surgeons. She has performed emergency procedures under fire that saved lives in active combat zones. She was ordered to disappear by her government after her testimony regarding war crimes. That order was final. Her identity was classified. And this man, Clayton gestured toward Caldwell on the split screen, exposed her identity over a public address system to cover up his own inadequacy. Caldwell's face drained of color. He tried to interrupt. Colonel Clayton's voice cut through him like a machete through jungle. You chose to humiliate a soldier instead of helping a civilian. That choice is going to cost you everything. Millions watched Caldwell's credibility disintegrate in real time. His hands shook. Sweat appeared on his forehead. His lawyer's face went hard and cold. The news anchor's expression shifted from professional interest to barely concealed contempt. By the next morning, the airport board had made their decision. Formal termination. Derek Caldwell was no longer the security manager of San Diego International. He was escorted from the building by officers who used to salute him. 6 weeks later, Rachel found him working the night shift at the security desk of Oak Creek Memorial Hospital, the medical center across the street from the airport. His name tag read Derek. Just Derek. He wore a navy blue uniform shirt with a generic security patch. He flinched when anyone called him sir. He flinched when anyone called him anything at all. 1 month after the airport board terminated him, Rachel returned to San Diego International. She was waiting at Gate 42 when Staff Sergeant Peter Dominguez arrived to catch a flight back to his home in Oregon. His recovery had been remarkable. 3 months of cardiac rehabilitation. 2 surgeries. A pacemaker that would keep him breathing for the next 15 years. He saw her and his entire face changed. He approached slowly. Carefully. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a patch, faded fabric, perhaps 40 years old. Special Forces insignia. The same unit designation that was sewn inside Rachel's jacket lining. Hidden. Never displayed. Never explained. The same unit that existed officially nowhere. He showed it to her without speaking. His hands moved in sign language, the same hands that had trembled in that airport security line weeks before. Now they were steady. Strong. Free. He signed, "Thank you." Rachel signed back, "You served." He nodded. He placed the patch gently on the armrest between them. She understood. Some things don't need words. Some things live in the quiet spaces between uniforms and civilian life. Some people carry secrets in jacket linings and never tell a soul. Travelers flowed past them, businessmen scrolling phones, families hurrying toward gates, tired flight attendants pulling luggage. None of them noticed the 2 warriors sitting quietly near the window. None of them understood what had just passed between them. None of them knew that this quiet moment had cost an empire of authority and institutional power to protect. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Rachel reached down and picked up the patch. She turned it over in her hands. The thread was breaking in places. The fabric was soft from being carried for decades. It was the most valuable thing anyone had ever given her. She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. Around them, the airport continued its endless motion. Departures and arrivals. Hellos and goodbyes. Civilians moving between the civilian world. And in the middle of that motion, 2 people who had seen what war actually looks like, sitting together in silence, understanding without needing to speak. Peter Dominguez caught his flight to Oregon. Rachel walked back through the terminal. As she passed the security checkpoint, a new manager now, a woman with careful eyes, she held her badge steady for inspection. No trembling. No flinching. She had spent 8 years invisible. It was time to be someone else. The airports and hospitals and waiting rooms of the world were full of people like her. Quiet people. Strong people. People who had held lives together with their hands while the world fell apart. People no one noticed because they didn't want to be noticed. But someone was always watching. Someone was always seeing. And sometimes, just sometimes, that quiet person in the corner was holding it all together. Thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. And we always love hearing from you. Drop a comment and tell us what state or country you're in.